come and have a seat. We'll have a little conversation first, and then you can answer your question. But thank you for the uplifting discussion. We've had some twos and fro's at this conference so far, but this was definitely the point you made at the end about the Kayam project. We have yesterday the chief executive of the Free Market Foundation giving us an update. It's not shooting any lights out. It's about 12,000 now. So just give us some insight onto how we could fix that. Start a trust, start a fund, maybe.
Well, sorry, Alec, is this thing on?
Let me just check with John. John, can we just double check? Are we going to talk on the microphone, on the handheld? No, not the handheld. Okay.
So, is this good enough?
Can you hear in the back? Yes.
Yeah, Alec, that's the one question my late father-in-law taught me. He was a politician. Never to ask, because a politician once did ask the question, can you all hear me? And somebody shouted, yes, we can, but we're happy to change places with somebody who can't. So, but, how do we affect it? I mean, the way the Free Market Foundation started is they asked people for donations. And, as I said, it was like 2,000 rand a pop. I was hoping that, not only individuals, but big corporates, particularly people that they have a relationship with, relatives or people who work or so, would step up and fund this initiative. It didn't happen. It's strange, how we think in South Africa. And then, of course, if you make the sums for the money that they lost in a year or two in South African Airways, the government, and they can make it even cheaper, because that 2,000 rand obviously is the surveyor to do the diagram, the deeds office, etc., etc. Interestingly enough, the first formal attempt was in Parys in the Free State, which at that time had a ANC mayor, female mayor. She was a real live wire, and the infamous Ace Magashule was the premier. But they were the first public authorities that gave the go-ahead. And I was fortunate enough, my family donated the first number, and I went up there to hand over these title deeds to the recipients. And it was an extremely emotional experience. Elderly black people. I remember the one lady bursting into tears. She was in her 90s, and she said, at last, I have something to leave my children, my heirs. And I thought this thing was going to take off, but as I say again, not on the priority list.
Well, maybe we'll put it on the priority list in future. But you made some pretty strong insights and some hopeful ones. Let's start off with the Rainbow Nation, or a return to the Rainbow Nation. It is a subject that's been covered here.
Yeah.
And in particular, a government of national unity. Would you support that?
I had an interesting experience. At the time in 1996, when FW was the deputy president, he organized a lunch at Grote Spier, as I recall, and he invited 30 or 40 business people. And he asked us, what do you guys think? Should I remain in the government of national unity, or should I exit? Here was the interesting thing. The views were lukewarm. Nobody was very excited about staying in or going out. Subsequently, certainly, I came to the conclusion that it was a mistake. FW should have stayed in the government of national unity. But that's now water under the bridge. I think a government of national unity, I'm not a political scientist, I'm a failed politician. But that I think, yes, it could certainly be one of the solutions to our rainbow nation.
No, you opened the door there. Failed politician.
Pardon?
Failed politician?
Failed politician, failed lawyer.
Did you?
A somewhat successful shopkeeper.
How are you seeing South Africa after the election? We've had comments here that it's the Doomsday Pact would take over, that this is the last chance that the country's got. From your perspective, how do you view those comments?
You know, Alec, I'm now in my 80s. I have in South Africa gone through so many last chances that I've kind of lost any faith in that concept. I don't think there's anything like a last chance. This will be, in my view, a very important election. We can all feel the ground shifting out there. There's something happening out there. So I'm hoping that there will be a lot of good changes.
Let's get on to a subject that I know is much closer to your heart. You mentioned a little about the eighth wonder of the world, compound growth. From Milei in Argentina. When people in the audience, young people in the audience, are looking at South Africa as an entrepreneurial opportunity because they could have compound growth into the future, how do you advise them?
Well, the first thing I advise them is not to lend their ears to all these doom prophets, but to look for the opportunities, of which there are, untold opportunities. If you understand the country, as I said, its rhythms, and that applies to Africa as well. I would advise them just to look for the opportunities and to use the magic formula, which is 4 words, WORK. Work and develop your business, whatever it is. There are enormous opportunities in this country. I see it every day. And I see every day people from other communities in South Africa coming forward, wanting to do something. Obviously, one of the constraints is that we still have, this old horse that we all ride, the red tape. To start a business in South Africa, if you compare it, for instance, to a country like Rwanda, where I'm told it takes 36 hours for you to get all the necessary permits, etc., to start and your own business. Easy. And we see that country, there's a lot of criticism about it becoming too autocratic or whatever. But the country itself is an African success story. But we're so slow to learn these lessons. If you look at the Western Cape, at Cape Town, it is relatively superbly governed compared to the other lot. Yet, and I've raised this with the authorities, it took my daughter almost 2.5 years to get planning permission to add a bedroom to her house. I have a little project going near where my offices are, which can be an absolute jewel for Cape Town. I'm now in year 3. I'm still nowhere. I'm told by architects that there are billions of rands worth of building plans, many funded by foreign investors, that are stuck in the pipeline. They just don't get done. Now that boggles the mind. So it's those things that we should focus on. Try and get that right.
And the perspective that there's 1.5 trillion rand in cash sitting on corporate balance sheets that hasn't been invested into South Africa. How does one unlock that?
Inter alia, by improving the climate so that the government is not always seen as business unfriendly. Now, there are a number of things they can do in that regard. And secondly, getting rid of some of the red, or most, if not all, of the so-called red tape. I spoke to an Italian who lives in South Africa part of the time. He lives in Botswana part of the time, but he remains an Italian citizen. Now, he told me, when this subject came up, I don't know how true it is, but that in Italy they've either done it or they are thinking of doing it, to pass an act that if you submit a building plan and you're not engaged within 3 months, or your plans are not approved within 3 months, you can carry on and build. As long as you certify, or your advisors, that you followed every rule. Now, let's pray. I'll tell you that this is also from the past. I happen to know one of the ministers of trade and industry there in the 80s. When he got appointed, we had this discussion, and he said he was going to draft an act like this. Now, that was in 1986. Look where we are.
Is part of the problem, though, on all of this, the corruption that we've had in the country? Because the old story of order and chaos, unless you have the order, you're going to have chaos, you'll have more corruption. And perhaps because there's been so much corruption, one of the unintended consequences is bureaucracy has just got more treacly.
Well, I think in many instances it can be argued that bureaucracy is the cause and the consequence. You have to make so many rules that, the temptation is there to just slip somebody something to get past one or two quickly. It is, as we know, causing enormous damage and has to be addressed. But again, as I tried to make the point in my little speech, that we've just got to approach it a little bit more subtly, more positively. How do you deal with it? There are ways and means. Countries have shown that it can be done. I'm hopeful in that regard as well.
You referenced that brilliant speech that Javier Milei, the Argentinian president, made at the World Economic Forum. Is there much from what he's done subsequent to that we can learn from here?
Well, I haven't followed it closely, but I am aware that there are things in Argentina where he just clamped down, and that things are on the up and up. But I haven't really studied it. I should have.
Okay, let me put that question to you a little differently. If we look at Rwanda and the points you were making there, and we brought through just what Milei had to say about what he wants to do because of the problems that he's facing, and the way that you see the world, and behind the scenes, the people that you talk to who will actually give you insights that we are not privy to. What is practically possible here post the election?
Practically possible. My own wish list would be understand that privatization of a lot of the state-owned entities is clearly the answer. Now, we see signs of that, with the Arbor transactions and the just failed SAA takeover, that there is movement in that regard. But I made the point that around the world it had been established beyond doubt that the private sector can do most of government functions, if not all, much cheaper and better than the state can do it. I recall there in the 1970s or 80s, I can't remember, there was a study done by the Office of Budget Management in the White House that came to the conclusion that there was not a single function performed by the United States government, the federal government, that could not be done at least 30% cheaper by the private sector. That was a thorough study. I should have tried to look it up and get more details, but and that's in America.
Well, Elon Musk has certainly shown that in the space area. Now, last night we had Dr. Anthea Jeffrey, who's sitting in the front row, telling us about the National Democratic Revolution and the fact that business was, to a degree, conned, and that this is on the table and is not going backwards and is still the driving force of the ANC. What would you say to that argument?
Yeah, well, again, I see signs, but Alex, I always caution people that when you ask my view, you must accept the caveat that I'm an incurable optimist. And, even my children attack me sometimes, say, Dad, how can you be so optimistic and so positive? For one very simple reason, that nobody has yet been able to explain to me what the benefit is of not being positive, of not being optimistic. So again, my stock answer would be that, as I tried to point out, how it took hundreds of years for people to learn that capitalism actually does the magic trick. But eventually they learned. Maybe these guys will also learn. There's a big thing about reality. Reality is the final arbiter. I remember my late father-in-law used to say, all these people who were calling for sanctions and actions against South Africa because of apartheid, he said they're wasting their time because apartheid will collapse under its own unworkability. In the end, you are just overwhelmed or overrun by the reality. And these guys will be as well.
And I think we probably know that from the electricity story.
Yeah.
Right. To the floor. Could you put your hand up? We've got the business team running around with microphones. There's Adrian in the front. Thanks, Frances. On this side, anybody put your hand up and our team will get to you.
Thank you very much, Krista. Just on the Rwanda situation, we have 4 properties there, and I can tell you now that there are 12 million people that live there, and there's probably 80% of them all have a title deed. Why can't we do it in this country? What is holding us back?
Is the question to us.
The question was, he's got 4 properties. It's Adrian Gardner. He's got 4 properties in Rwanda. And 80% of the people of Rwandans have got title deeds. What's holding us back?
Well, I would, in the first instance, blame the government because they can make it happen overnight. Very easy. I'm sure Rwanda did it by a pen stroke. And we can do the same. But I do think that the government deserves the bulk of the blame, but also the political participants, all of us. We can all make a difference in getting that initiative going and kind of forcing the government's hand. An interesting thing happened when they launched the Kayam initiative. There was a then Deputy Minister, Jeremy Cronin. Is that the right name? He was sort of the secretary of the Communist Party or whatever. And he wrote an article in the Cape Times, which I've subsequently tried to find. I couldn't find it. I don't know whether they sometimes block it or hide something. He wrote an article to say that he is against this initiative because all that will happen, this was his argument, is that these poor people living in shacks or, sort of makeshift homes will acquire the title deed. They will then have something that they can sell, and the big bad capitalists will come and buy their properties, and they will just end up being squatters again. That was his argument. So I was trying to get hold of him. I couldn't. I never knew him, but I would say to him, Mr. Cronin, this is our plan. Now tell me, what is yours? You've got all the criticism against, which is ill-founded. Ill-founded. Why would we go and buy these big capitalists? Why would they go and buy the land in Khayelitsha? For what? There you go.
It is an interesting debate. Ideology
Yeah.
Is it being trumped in this country, though, by practicality? And I think that's really the big question. We've got an election coming. Are we mature enough to be practical?
Well, look, if we're not, we're for the high jump, eh? If we don't learn, like we would have been, in my view, for the high jump, if we didn't learn over nearly 50 years that the apartheid thing was simply not going to work.
Go ahead, sir.
Mr. Wiese, thank you very much for your very wise words, which we will take cognizance of. I just want to ask a question. There's interminable corruption in this country. I think we all agree. My question to you is the Steinhoff problem. It never seems to get sorted out. When will it be sorted out?
You can imagine, I hope, you know how anxious I am. I try to live my life by not hating. As I had a friend who used to explain to me that when you hate owns you. The other person is not affected. He couldn't give a damn. So I try not to hate, but I am also, as I said, a failed lawyer, so I want to see justice done. And it disturbs me as much as anybody else that they're not arresting the culprits and bringing them to justice. Every year I'm told by June we'll arrest them. But I always make this point. We criticize, and I think rightly so, our prosecuting authority for being so slow in prosecuting this matter particularly. But then I point out that the Germans, who have a well-deserved reputation for efficiency, it took them more than 5 years before they arrested the first people in Germany and tried them. One had gone to jail, the other one has a suspended sentence and was at a fine. But it took the Germans 5 years. So what does that tell you? It tells you just how complicated this fraud, to prove it and to get a conviction on it, just how complicated it is. So they tell me, the Hawks, you know, I'd seen them several times, and I obviously always ask them when. And the last time I met with one of the senior officers was last year. They indicated that they're waiting for certain information, documents. Here it's quite a process from Germany, and that they're expecting to make arrests sometime this year. So we'll have to wait and see.
Are those arrests before June?
Yeah, that's what they said.
But how do you answer the allegation that you knew all along?
Very simple, very simple. Let me tell you the story. After having given countless interviews, a friend of mine who's in the media world came and said, but Christo, here is one very intelligent journalist whom I happen to know, and you must give her an interview, because she will get the story right. I said, okay, make an appointment, but tell her that she's got to do her homework before she comes for the interview. No, that's done. So she pitches up, sit down. She starts off. She said, Christo, people say you must have known. I said, why? Why must I have known? The auditors didn't know, the banks didn't know, the Reserve Bank didn't know, the regulators didn't know, the ratings agencies didn't know, etc., etc. Why should I have known? No, she said, but you were the chairman. I said, yes, indeed. Now, you have done your homework. For how long was I the chairman? Oh, she said, 5 or 6 years. I said, I became chairman in May 2016, and the implosion happened in December 2017. So I chaired exactly 4 board meetings. Have you got that clear? She was very embarrassed because she was hopelessly wrong. And then I said, but you know what? I'll make it easy for you. Of course, I knew everything. And once it was perfectly clear to me that Jooste had been committing fraud for decades, when that picture was perfectly clear, I wrote a check for 60 billion rand and invested it in the company. She said, she looked at me and she said, well, Christo, if you put it that way, I thought,
I've had fascinating conversations with the head of the audit committee, Dr. Steve Boyson.
yeah,
And he told me a story which I'd love you to repeat.
Yeah.
On that very last day,
yes.
that you, just before the bomb burst,
Yeah.
what happened with Markus Jooste?
Now, that's an interesting story. I mean, there's a bit of this thing that, yeah, well, let me not go into that. But the board meeting was to be held on a Monday, 4th of December. Steve was the chairman of the audit committee. He'd been dealing with the auditors. I was not aware of it. On the Wednesday before the Monday, he comes to me. He says, the auditors want to have a word with you as chairman. I said, they're welcome. So they pitch up, and when they sat down, they were guys from Holland. I said, look, I want to make one thing clear. There must nothing be held back. You must be very candid. Don't pussyfoot. And so this one Dutchman got up and he said, well, I just want to tell you that the management of this company had been defrauding the company for more than a decade. I said, what? But you guys have been signing off the accounts for a decade and a half. What are you referring to? And he gave me a big paper and he said, here are the 6 issues on which we have serious questions and that we need to get to the bottom of. Now, I said, but all these points, there are the accounts from the previous year. You, the same guys, signed off on it. Yeah, but we've now got new information. Now, one of the items dealt with an item on the balance sheet which is called cash or near cash. And the near cash are what we call bills of exchange. In German, it's Wechsel. I said, explain to me what this is about. Now, I did at university, I did a little bit of a course that dealt with those sort of issues. So I had some understanding, but they explained to me that they needed certain audit information in order to accept that that item is real. I said, well, let's call in Jooste. Now, up to that time, the auditors insisted that they could not sign off the accounts without a forensic investigation. Now, this is days before the accounts were due to be published. So it would be disastrous. I called in Jooste. I said, look, we're talking frankly here. These people are accusing you of being a fraudster. He said, on what grounds? I said, well, let's take this one simple, this Wechsel story. He spoke for 20 minutes. After 20 minutes, the auditors asked to be excused. They came back to me and said they've reconsidered and provided Jooste gives the following 1, 2, 3 documents, they will not insist on a forensic investigation. He swayed them in 20 minutes on that point. So, great relief. The next day, which was a Thursday, I was in my car. They phoned me. They said, we're very sorry. We've looked at it again, and we must now insist on a forensic investigation. I told Jooste had made arrangements to fly to Germany that Friday. And he said he's going to Germany. He will get all the people together and he'll get all the documentation, this documentation that was required, and he will be back in South Africa on Monday. So off he went. By that time, it became clear that there was no way that we were going to get the accounts signed off. I mean, even if he brought all these documents. So we appointed PwC as forensic auditors. And on the Monday, Jooste came back in the company plane. And at, I think it was 9:42 or 8:42, he left a voicemail on my telephone, which obviously I got the lawyers to transcribe and have it ready there. And here was his message to me. Christo, I've just landed. I'm on my way home to have a shower. I've got Schreiber, the one guy who's now gone to jail, and all the documents required. I've got it all with me. You can get the two teams of auditors together, and we will clear everything up. That was at 9 o'clock on the Monday morning. At 5 o'clock that afternoon, he sent a lawyer to me. Lawyer phone said, Christo, are you at the office? I said, yeah. He said, well, I'm on my way to you with a message. And then I knew. When he came and he said, Jooste is threatening suicide and blah, blah, blah. And he's offered his resignation. But you must decide whether you'll accept it. The next morning was a board meeting. I called the board together. I mean, they were there. I said, guys, this is what happened. Now, my suggestion is we do not accept his resignation. I will call him to come back to the office and to help the people sort the mess out, because he knows where the bodies are buried. And as it turned out, just about only he and those two guys in Germany. I phoned him. He was at his lawyer's. I said, this is my suggestion to you. Come back, sort the mess out, then we'll try to save the company. He said he'll be there in 2 or 3 hours. That's the last I ever heard of him. Never pitched. But here is the irony. In the retrospect, if he had come back and helped sort the problem out, the company could have been saved. Because the company had wonderful assets, mainly the assets that I sold to the company. They're worth, I mean, at one stage, the market capitalization of those two companies a year ago was somewhere in the region of 150 billion rand. So the 60 billion or whatever the fraud amount was, we could have dealt with the banks and the company would have been saved. But from Jooste's perspective, he would have gone to jail. It would be out now. He would have been out. So that was another bad miscalculation.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that story with us. Wow.